The heavy metallic crack of the containment gate echoed against the red rock cliffs as Rook, the 95-pound Belgian Malinois, launched himself like a missile into the chain link. Handler number 7 was already being dragged through the dust, his arm a shredded mess of tactical nylon and blood. The order from the observation deck was instantaneous and cold: clear the yard. Prepare for terminal sedation. At that exact moment, Travis Halstead, a man who had spent 3 years trying to drink the memory of Syria out of his blood, killed the engine of his battered Jeep. He stepped out into the blistering Arizona heat, ignoring the security team's screams to stay back. He didn't see a rabid animal. He saw a Guardian perimeter sweep, a hyperlethal tactical scan he had personally engineered in the Damascus program. While the guards raised their rifles, Travis's blood ran cold. The dog wasn't looking at the men. His eyes were snapped toward the high ridgeline, tracking a threat that wasn't there. Travis knew that if he didn't step into that yard weaponless in the next 60 seconds, he wasn't just losing a dog. He was watching the only other survivor of a classified massacre be silenced forever. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story, because tomorrow, I have another beautiful story to share with you and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Now let's get into the story. The silence of the Arizona high desert was a physical weight, the only thing Travis Halstead had truly owned since his dishonorable discharge. For 3 years, it had been the sound of 100-degree days passing in a blur of low-level security contracts and cheap motels from Morocco to Manila. He was 38, carved from lean, sun-hardened muscle, his face a map of exhaustion and gray-salted stubble. He had come to these canyons to escape the man who built monsters, and in return the world had agreed to let him rot. His decade-old Jeep groaned as he pulled onto the gravel shoulder of the Blackridge Tactical K-9 facility. He usually avoided this concrete box of endings, but a cryptic call from Colonel Stern had brought him back to the gates of his own nightmare. Inside the fence, the chaos was absolute. David, a lead contractor, was stumbling back from the cage, his face pale with shock. "That thing is a weapon with a broken trigger," David yelled at the facility director, Kane. "I want it euthanized now." Travis's gaze shifted to the cage. The dog, Rook, was a blur of fur and fury, hitting the metal door with a sickening thud. But as Travis watched, his foot came off the gas. He recognized the posture. The dog's ears weren't forward in aggression. They were pinned flat, and his head was snapping upward, scanning the rooftops and the empty blue horizon. "He's looking for the mortars," Travis whispered. The bright New Mexico sun dissolved into the dust of Damascus. He was back in the ruins watching Rook, then just a pup, freeze in this exact same high-threat scan seconds before the world turned to fire. The dog wasn't rabid. He was still fighting a war that everyone else had forgotten. The ice had long since melted in the glass of cheap Tanduay rum by the time the sun began to bake the humidity out of the Manila air. Travis Halstead sat on a warped plastic chair on a balcony that overlooked a labyrinth of corrugated tin roofs and tangled power lines. For 3 years, this had been his ritual. Find a city where the noise was loud enough to drown out the screaming in his head, and stay until the locals started asking too many questions. Before Manila, it was a dusty security gig in Tangier. Before that, a stint protecting cargo ships in the Sulu Sea. He was 38 years old, but in the mirror of the dim bathroom, he saw a man who had lived twice that. His dark hair was cropped in a jagged, self-inflicted buzz cut, and his eyes, the color of a winter Atlantic, held the haunted stillness of a man who had seen the world break and realized he was the one who had provided the hammer. The phone on the scarred wooden table vibrated, skittering like a nervous insect. He didn't answer numbers he didn't recognize, but this one was different. It carried a DC area code he hadn't seen since he was escorted off the base in Damascus. "Halstead," he said, his voice like gravel grinding on metal. "We found him, Travis." The voice was unmistakable. Colonel Marcus Stern. It was a voice that belonged to briefing rooms and oak-paneled offices, a voice that had once promised Travis he was doing the Lord's work. Travis felt the air leave his lungs. He didn't need to ask who him was. Where? Arizona. A private contractor facility called Blackridge. They bought him in a bulk asset transfer after the Damascus program was liquidated. He's hospitalizing their people, Travis. 7 handlers in 6 months. They've got him on a terminal countdown. 72 hours until they put a bolt in his head. He's a Guardian, Marcus. You don't put them in civilian hands. I didn't make the sale, Travis, but I'm making this call. There's a flight out of Ninoy Aquino in 4 hours. Your name is on the manifest. Fix this or bury it. But don't let him die in a cage. The Arizona heat was a different kind of monster than the Philippine humidity. It was a dry, searing heat that felt like a physical weight against the windshield of the battered Jeep Travis had rented in Phoenix. He drove north, the red rock monoliths rising out of the desert floor like the tombstones of giants. The Black Ridge Tactical K-9 facility sat like a jagged scar on the landscape, 12 acres of high-tensile chain link and reinforced concrete tucked into a canyon. It was a place designed for privacy and containment. As Travis pulled up to the main gate, he saw the black-clad security contractors patrolling the perimeter with suppressed carbines. This wasn't a training school, it was a laboratory for weaponized animals. He killed the engine, and for a moment the silence was absolute. Then, from deep within the compound, came a sound that vibrated in his marrow, a raw, percussive bark that ended in a throat-tearing snarl. It wasn't the sound of a dog. It was the sound of a soldier who had been left behind. "Halstead? You're late." Travis looked up. Standing by the reinforced glass of the intake center was a man in a crisp tan tactical polo. This was Kane, the facility director. He was late 50s, with a corporate tan and eyes that looked at everything in terms of depreciating value. "The flight was delayed," Travis said, stepping out of the Jeep. His boots hit the gravel with a crunch that felt too loud. "Come inside." "We don't have time for the scenic tour," Kane said, not offering a hand. Inside, the air conditioning was set to a clinical chill. Travis was led into a high-tech briefing room where two other people waited. The first was a man in his early 30s, wearing a custom-fitted plate carrier and a sneer. This was Reeves, the lead handler. He had the cocky, territorial posture of a man who considered himself the alpha in every room. The second was a woman with her dark hair pulled into a tight bun, wearing a white lab coat over tactical pants. Dr. Asha Patel. She looked at Travis not with the suspicion of the men, but with a weary, clinical sadness. "Let's get to it," Kane said, clicking a remote. A file appeared on the wall-mounted screen. Subject, Rook. Breed, Belgian Malinois. Weight, 95 pounds. Origin, Damascus Tactical Program. "We bought this animal as a Tier 1 asset," Kane said, his voice flat. "He was supposed to be the gold standard for our private security contracts. Instead, he's a liability. 6 months on site. 3 handlers in intensive care. One of them will never walk without a brace again. He doesn't respond to negative reinforcement, and he ignores positive stimuli. He's been deemed irredeemably aggressive." "He's not aggressive," Travis said, his eyes fixed on the photo of the dog, a massive, scarred Malinois with amber eyes that looked like burning coals. "He's tactical. There's a difference." Reeves snorted, leaning back against the wall. "Call it whatever you want, Halstead. I've worked the best shepherds and malice in the industry. That thing isn't a dog. It's a glitch in the system. It attacks without warning and won't release until you hit it with a high-voltage prod. Your Damascus methods produced a freak." Travis turned his head slowly to look at Reeves. The stillness in Travis's posture was more threatening than a raised fist. "My methods produced guardians. Dogs that could clear a mud brick compound in the dark and tell the difference between a combatant and a child by the scent of their adrenaline. If he's glitching, it's because you're trying to use a scalpel like a sledgehammer." "Enough," Dr. Patel interrupted, her voice soft but firm. "Travis, I've read your original training logs. You spoke about a singular handler bond that was supposed to be unbreakable. But Rook, he's different. He has severe PTSD markers. He's hypervigilant. He scans the ridgelines for threats that aren't there. He hasn't slept more than 2 hours at a time in weeks." "Because he's waiting for the mortars?" Travis whispered. The room went silent. Kane cleared his throat. "I don't care about his psychological profile, Doctor. I care about my bottom line. The board has already signed the euthanasia order. I'm giving you 72 hours because Colonel Stern pulled some very expensive strings. Make him controllable, someone I can put a leash on, or he gets a bullet. Those are the terms." Travis looked at the file again. Damascus. The word felt like a brand on his skin. "Why was the Damascus program shut down, Halstead?" Reeves asked, his voice dripping with feigned curiosity. "The official report said the dogs went rogue in Syria. Said they started hitting civilians. Said their creator lost his mind and gave them the wrong kill codes." The weight of the past sins hit Travis in the chest. He remembered the smell of ozone and burnt hair. He remembered the way the brass had turned their backs when the assets became too politically inconvenient to keep alive. "They didn't go rogue," Travis said, his voice a low vibration. "They were betrayed. Just like he was." "Whatever helps you sleep at night," Reeves smirked. "But here's the reality. 7 pros couldn't get a collar on him. What makes you think you're different? Travis didn't answer Reeves. He looked at Kane. 72 hours. Start the clock. The clock started when you drove through the gate, Kane said. He's in the high isolation yard. Section 4. I suggest you don't go in there without a bite suit and at least 2 backups with tranquilizer rifles. I don't need a suit, Travis said, turning toward the door. You're going to get yourself killed, Dr. Patel said, following him into the hallway. He's not the dog you remember, Travis. They used shock collars on him for 3 months after you left. They broke his trust in the most fundamental way possible. Travis stopped at the heavy steel door that led to the yard. He could hear the whispers of the staff in the observation lounge, the sound of bets being placed on how long he'd last. I didn't come here to train him, Doctor, Travis said, his hand on the lever. Then why are you here? Travis looked through the reinforced glass at the shimmering heat of the yard. I'm here to apologize. He pushed the door open and stepped out into the glare. Behind him he heard the click of the lock. He didn't look back. He began the long walk toward the far end of the enclosure, where a massive, scarred shape was pacing behind the chain link, the sound of its breathing a low, rhythmic growl that promised nothing but blood. The walk to Section 4 was a journey through a graveyard of living things. Travis followed the concrete path, his boots striking the ground with a rhythmic, hollow thud that seemed to echo off the high, sun-bleached walls. He could feel the eyes on his back, not just from the security cameras that swiveled with mechanical precision to track his movement, but from the observation posts perched above the yards. Up there, behind the mirrored glass of the climate-controlled towers, the Blackridge staff were gathered. He didn't need to see them to know they were checking their watches and passing around crumpled bills. To them, he was a ghost story come to life, the disgraced architect of the Damascus program, back to face the most broken of his creations. Yard 4 is double reinforced, Dr. Patel said, walking a half-pace behind him. Her voice was steady, but he caught the slight tremor in her hands as she adjusted her clipboard. The chain link is titanium infused. The secondary perimeter is electrified at night. We don't take chances with this one. Travis didn't respond. He stopped at the primary observation fence, 10 feet from the heavy mesh. Inside the yard, the dust was a fine red powder that coated everything. And there, in the center of the enclosure, was Rook. The dog didn't look like the pup Travis had held in the palm of his hand 4 years ago. This was a 95-pound engine of bone and sinew, his coat a dark, soot-smeared mahogany. He was a Belgian Malinois built for the extreme, broader in the chest than most of his breed, with legs like coiled springs. Scars crisscrossed his muzzle like a roadmap of every mistake a human had ever made with him. One ear had a jagged notch taken out of it, and a long hairless line of silver scar tissue ran from his shoulder down to his flank. But it was the eyes that stopped Travis's breath. They were amber, the color of hardened sap, and they held absolutely no warmth. They were flat, analytical, and cold. Rook wasn't pacing like a bored zoo animal. He was moving in a wide, tactical semicircle, his nose low to the ground, his body language communicating a state of permanent, high-alert readiness. Travis stood perfectly still. He didn't make a sound. He didn't offer a hand or a whistle. He simply watched. For 30 seconds, Rook continued his patrol, ignoring the man at the fence as if he were just another piece of the scenery. Then the wind shifted. A faint breeze carried the scent of wood smoke, stale rum, and a very specific, familiar musk across the yard. Rook froze. His head snapped up, his ears pinning back so tightly they vanished into the thick ruff of his neck. Recognition didn't come slowly. It hit the dog like a lightning strike. Rook didn't bark. He didn't growl. He exploded. He covered the 30 feet of dirt in a blur of motion so fast the human eye could barely track it. He hit the titanium mesh with a sound like a car crash. The fence groaned, the steel posts vibrating deep into the concrete footings. Rook was a whirlwind of white teeth and foaming rage, lunging at the wire, his claws tearing at the metal as he tried to reach Travis's throat. It wasn't the random, frantic aggression of a scared dog. It was targeted. It was personal. He knows me, Travis thought, the realization settling in his gut like a lead weight. And he hates me. The sound of Rook's fury triggered a sensory slide, and suddenly the Arizona sun was the blistering heat of the Syrian desert. It was 2021, and the Damascus facility was a hidden oasis of high-tech cruelty disguised as innovation. Travis remembered Rook as Asset 09. He remembered the way the puppy would look at him with a desperate, hungry intelligence. The training had been a radical departure from standard canine protocols. Under the Damascus directive, the goal wasn't to create a companion, it was to create a biological weapon system. The world is divided into 2 categories, Travis had told the junior handlers back then, his own voice sounding like a stranger's in his memory. Targets and handlers. Nothing else exists. If it isn't the man holding the leash, it is a threat to be neutralized. He had pioneered the aggressive isolation method. Rook had never played with a ball. He had never been petted for the sake of affection. Every touch was a command. Every meal was a reward for a successful strike. Travis had conditioned the dog to view human vulnerability as an opening to kill, and human dominance as the only language worth speaking. He had stripped the dog out of the animal, leaving behind only the soldier. The ultimate goal was a dog that wouldn't hesitate to enter a room of armed insurgents and clear it before a single shot could be fired. But the byproduct, the thing Travis had been too arrogant to see, was a creature that had been taught that trust was a fatal flaw. "I'm sorry, Rook," Travis whispered in the present, though the words were drowned out by the dog's snarling. When Travis had been forced out of the program after the Syria mission went sideways, he had been told the dogs were being rehomed to elite units. He had told himself they would be okay because they were the best. He had abandoned Rook to the very system he had helped build. "He's been waiting for you," Dr. Patel's voice broke through the memory. She was standing a few feet back, her eyes fixed on the display on her tablet. "His heart rate just spiked to 220, she said. "He isn't just defending his territory, Travis. He's hunting. Look at the way he's focusing on your face. He's not looking at your hands or your boots. He's looking for the kill strike." Travis watched Rook's frantic, calculated assault on the fence. "I taught him that look. I taught him that if the handler leaves, he's been abandoned in a combat zone. To him, my face isn't a memory of home. It's the face of the man who left him in the dark." "It's worse than that," Patel said, her voice dropping to a whisper. She stepped closer, showing him the tablet. It was a series of medical scans and blurry cell phone videos. After the Damascus program was liquidated, he was sold to a private security firm in Eastern Europe. They didn't have your nuance. When he didn't perform, they used heavy-duty shock collars. When that didn't break him, they put him in underground fighting rings. They wanted to see if a super soldier dog could outkill a pit bull. Travis felt a cold, sharp anger pierce through his guilt. Did he? "He killed 4 of them before the ring was busted," Patel said. "But he didn't do it for sport. He did it because he thought he was still on mission. He thinks the entire world is a Black Ops raid that never ended." Travis looked back at the dog. Rook had stopped lunging. He was standing at the fence, his chest heaving, his amber eyes locked onto Travis's. There was a profound, jagged loneliness in that stare, the look of a soldier who had survived the war only to realize there was no world left to go back to. "I didn't just train him to kill," Travis said, his voice thick. "I trained him to never trust again. And then I gave him a reason to prove I was right." "Halstead." The sharp bark of Kane's voice cut through the tension. The director was standing at the gate of the observation tower, Reeves flanking him like a loyal hound. "The board just called," Kane shouted down. "They saw the footage of the recognition. They aren't impressed. They see a dog that wants to rip your head off. 72 hours, Halstead. And the clock is ticking. Are you going to stand there all day or are you going to do something?" Reeves smirked, crossing his arms over his tactical vest. "Why don't you try one of those singular bond whistles, Travis? Or maybe just tell him he's a good boy. I'm sure he'll stop trying to eat the fence any second now." Travis didn't look at Reeves. He looked at the electronic keypad on the yard gate. "Open the gate," Travis said. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Rook seemed to sense the shift, his growl dropping to a low, vibrating hum in his chest. "Excuse me?" Kane said, leaning over the railing. "You heard me. Open the gate. I'm going in." "The hell you are," Reeves barked, his smirk vanishing. "You go in there without a suit and we're cleaning you up with a hose in 30 seconds. I'm the lead handler here and I won't have a suicide on my shift." "I'm not going in as a handler," Travis said, finally turning to look at them. His face was a mask of grim determination. "I'm going in as a target." "Travis, don't," Dr. Patel pleaded, grabbing his arm. "He's in a high arousal state. He's literally seeing red. If you step in there, his training will take over. He won't be able to stop himself." "Then he won't be the only one who dies today," Travis said, shaking her hand off. He walked toward the gatehouse where a nervous security guard was watching the exchange. Kane scrambled down the stairs, meeting Travis at the gate. He held a piece of paper in his hand, a legal release form. "You sign this," Kane said, his eyes narrow. "You sign this and acknowledge that Blackridge is not responsible for dismemberment or death. You're a civilian contractor, Halstead. If you want to play martyr for a broken dog, that's your business. But I won't have it on my insurance. Travis took the pen. His hand didn't shake. He signed his name in a jagged, decisive scrawl. This is suicide, Kane muttered, taking the paper back. You're walking into the jaws of a monster. Travis looked through the wire one last time. Rook was waiting. The dog had backed away from the fence, crouching low, his muscles rippling under his scarred hide. He was ready for the kill shot. He's not a monster, Kane, Travis said, his voice sounding older than the hills around them. He's a mirror. And it's time I fixed what I broke. He stepped up to the gate. The electronic lock disengaged with a heavy, metallic clunk. Travis reached out, his hand on the lever, and pushed his way into the yard. The heavy iron lever of the gate didn't just click. It groaned, a sound of industrial finality that seemed to vibrate through the soles of Travis's boots. As he stepped across the threshold into Section 4, the atmosphere changed. Outside the fence, there was the hum of air conditioners and the distant murmur of a facility at work. Inside, there was only the sound of the wind whipping red dust against the chain link and the ragged, predatory breathing of a killer. Travis didn't stop until he was 15 feet inside. He didn't look back at the gate. He didn't look up at the observation towers where he knew Reeves was likely checking the safety on a tranquilizer rifle, hoping for an excuse to use it. Instead, he did something that caused a collective gasp to ripple through the speakers of the facility's intercom system. He reached up, unbuttoned his tactical overshirt, and dropped it into the dirt. Then he kicked his boots off. He stood in the center of the yard in nothing but a thin t-shirt and cargo pants, his feet bare against the scorching grit of the Arizona earth. He was intentionally stripping away every layer of handler. No leather, no thick canvas, no protection. To a dog trained in the Damascus program, a bite suit was an invitation to a game, a challenge to find the soft meat beneath the armor. By removing it, Travis was changing the rules of the engagement. He's lost his mind. Reeves's voice crackled over the yard's PA system, thin and tinny. Kane, he's a dead man. I'm authorized to fire the moment that Molly breaks skin. Stand down, Reeves, Dr. Patel's voice cut in, sharp with anxiety. He knows what he's doing. Travis ignored them. His world had shrunk to the space between him and the 95-pound shadow crouching near the far wall. Rook didn't hesitate. To the dog, the opening of the gate was a breach in his perimeter. The removal of the clothes was a taunt. He didn't growl, he launched. It was a beautiful, terrifying sight. The Malinois covered the distance in 3 massive, bounding strides, his body a low-slung blur of mahogany fur. He didn't jump for the arm or the leg. He aimed for the throat. Travis didn't flinch. He didn't raise his hands to protect his face. He didn't even shift his weight. He stood like a statue carved from the red rock of the canyon, his arms hanging limp at his sides, his eyes cast down at a point 3 inches in front of Rook's paws. The air displacement of the dog's charge hit Travis's chest like a physical blow. Rook skidded to a halt so violent his back end fishtailed in the dust. He stopped less than 4 inches from Travis's throat, his jaws snapping shut with a sound like a bone breaking. The heat from the dog's breath was a wet, metallic fog against Travis's skin. Rook let out a sound then, not a bark but a high-pitched, vibrating scream of pure frustration. He circled Travis, his hackles raised like a serrated blade along his spine. He snapped at Travis's bare ankles, the teeth grazing the skin but not breaking it. He was confused. The target wasn't fighting. The target wasn't fleeing. The monster Travis had created was looking for a combatant and finding only a ghost. Constructive surrender, Travis whispered, the words barely audible over the wind. I'm not the enemy, Rook. I'm just here. The first hour was a test of adrenaline. The sun climbed higher, turning the yard into a convection oven. The red dust began to cake in the sweat on Travis's brow, stinging his eyes, but he didn't wipe it away. To move was to challenge. To move was to trigger the hardwired kill codes. Rook spent that hour in a state of high arousal madness. He lunged, stopped, lunged again. He circled Travis hundreds of times, his claws clicking against the occasional buried stone. Each time the dog came close, the air in the yard seemed to vanish. Travis could smell the copper of the dog's saliva, the musk of a predator that had spent years in a cage of its own making. By the second hour, the 105-degree heat began to take its toll. The adrenaline was being replaced by a crushing, physiological exhaustion. Travis's bare feet were beginning to blister against the hot earth, a slow, searing pain that tested his resolve. Above him, he could see the silhouettes of the staff in the observation deck. They weren't betting anymore. They were watching in a stunned, heavy silence. This was the core of Travis's philosophy, the part of the Damascus program he had kept hidden from the military brass. The belief that a dog's aggression wasn't a personality trait, but a language. And if you refused to speak the language of violence, eventually, the dog would have to find a new way to communicate. "You're dying out there, Halstead," Kane's voice boomed over the PA, sounding less corporate and more unsettled. "Your heart rate is 140. You're showing signs of heat stroke. Come out. We'll give you a fresh start tomorrow." "No," Travis croaked. His throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. "If I leave now, the cycle stays closed. He has to see me break." Travis began the second phase of the surrender. Slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, he began to lower his center of gravity. He moved an inch every 5 minutes. Rook reacted to every shift with a snarl, his body tensing for the strike. But as the third hour bled into the fourth, the dog's own exhaustion began to mirror Travis's. The Malinois' tongue hung long and dry from his mouth. His pace had slowed from a tactical trot to a weary limp. The weapon was running out of fuel. When Travis finally sat down in the dirt, Rook froze. Travis didn't sit with his back to the wall. He sat in the center of the yard, completely exposed from all sides. He crossed his legs and lowered his head, exposing the back of his neck, the most vulnerable part of a primate's anatomy. He was offering Rook the kill shot. He was handing over the knife. Rook approached. He didn't charge this time. He moved with a predatory, shivering caution. He was 5 feet away. 4, 3. The dog stood over him, his massive shadow falling across Travis's slumped shoulders. Travis could feel the vibrating heat of the dog's chest. Rook leaned in, his wet nose pressing hard against the back of Travis's ear. The dog's teeth clicked against Travis's skull, a deliberate, terrifying display of power. "This is it," Travis thought. "This is where the monster finishes what I started." But the bite never came. Rook let out a long, shuddering breath, a sound that was almost a sigh. The dog didn't lie down and he didn't walk away. He simply stood there, his body pressed against Travis's back, his head resting heavily on Travis's shoulder. It wasn't an act of affection. It was an act of mutual collapse. Two soldiers, broken by the same war, finally realizing they were standing in the same ruins. The sun was beginning to dip behind the canyon walls when the gate finally buzzed open. Travis stood up, his legs shaking so violently he nearly fell. His skin was the color of raw steak, his lips cracked and bleeding. He didn't look back at Rook as he walked toward the exit. He couldn't. If he looked back, the spell would break. He stumbled into the intake corridor, where Dr. Patel was waiting with a literal mountain of wet towels and a liter of electrolyte solution. She caught him before his knees hit the concrete. "Your core temp is 103, she hissed, her voice a mix of fury and awe. "You're an idiot, Travis. You're a complete and total idiot." "Did you see?" he rasped, clutching the water bottle with hands that looked like claws. "I saw," she whispered, her eyes shining. "He let you sit. He didn't just let you live, he looked for contact." Kane and Reeves were standing a few feet back. Reeves looked like he'd been forced to swallow a bucket of glass. He was staring at the surveillance monitors, rewatching the footage of Rook leaning his head on Travis's shoulder. "It doesn't change anything," Kane said, though his voice lacked its usual bite. "He's still a liability. He's still not controllable by any standard that matters to my clients. You have 48 hours left, Halstead. One afternoon of sitting in the dirt hasn't cured 6 months of blood." Travis looked up at the director, a grim, jagged smile touching his parched lips. "He's not cured, Kane." He's confused. For the first time in 4 years, he met someone who wasn't trying to win. "That's not a liability. That's a crack in the armor." Travis shoved past them, his bare, blistered feet leaving faint red prints on the clean linoleum. He needed sleep, and he needed to drown the guilt that was currently screaming louder than the pain in his body. As he reached the end of the hall, he stopped and looked at the screen one last time. In the yard, Rook was standing exactly where Travis had left him. The dog wasn't scanning the ridgelines for mortars. He wasn't pacing. He was staring at the door through which Travis had vanished, his amber eyes no longer flat and cold, but wide with a terrifying newfound curiosity. 48 hours, Travis whispered to the empty hallway. "Then we see who's really broken." The command center was a tomb of blue light and humming servers. Travis sat in a swivel chair that felt too soft, his body aching with a dull rhythmic throb from the previous day's standoff. On the wall of monitors, Rook was a grainy, monochromatic ghost, looping over and over in recorded history. Travis leaned forward, his eyes narrowed as he watched a video from 3 months ago. In the footage, a handler named Miller, number 5, was attempting a standard dominance pincher. Miller was big, a former ranger with arms like hams, and he was using a heavy-duty catch pole to pin Rook's neck to the concrete. "There," Travis whispered to the empty room. On the screen, Rook wasn't fighting back with the chaotic thrashing of a wild animal. He was waiting. He waited until the exact microsecond Miller shifted his weight, anticipating the next move. Then Rook didn't just bite. He executed a lateral tactical pivot, bypassed the pole, and took Miller's calf. It was a move Travis had taught the Damascus pups to use against insurgents wielding rebar or clubs. "Pattern recognition," a voice said from the shadows. Travis didn't turn. He knew the heavy, arrogant tread. Reeves stepped into the light, holding a steaming mug of coffee that smelled of burnt beans and resentment. "You've been staring at that loop for 2 hours, Halstead. Looking for a way to prove you didn't create a psychopath?" "I'm looking at a dog that only bites when someone tries to dominate him or when they show fear," Travis said, his voice flat. "He's not aggressive, Reeves. He's defensive. He thinks every person who walks into that yard is there to finish the job." Reeves let out a short, jagged laugh. "The job was finished 3 years ago in Syria, Travis. Don't act like you're the misunderstood artist here. I've seen the classified after-action reports. Your Damascus dogs didn't just clear houses, they cleared entire blocks. Combatants, non-combatants, it didn't matter to them. They went rogue because you built them to be too sharp. You gave them a hair trigger and no safety catch, and when the mission went sideways, you were the one they hung out to dry." Travis felt the phantom weight of his dishonorable discharge papers in his pocket. The memory of the Damascus program wasn't just a failure, it was a stain. He had wanted to create the ultimate protector, a dog that could think, a dog that could choose. But the military hadn't wanted a partner, they had wanted a disposable weapon. And Travis, in his hubris, had provided the blueprint. "They didn't go rogue," Travis said, finally looking at Reeves. "They followed their conditioning. We taught them that the world was a target-rich environment. I didn't give them a safety because I was told they would never be off-leash." "Well, look where that got you," Reeves said, leaning in. "Rook is the last of a bad batch. He's a reminder of a program the Pentagon wants to forget. You think you're here for redemption? You're here because you're the only one who can sign the papers saying he's a lost cause without the colonel getting his hands dirty. You're the cleanup crew, Halstead. Nothing more." Reeves turned on his heel and walked out, leaving the air heavy with the scent of old sins. A few minutes later, the door hissed open again. This time it was Dr. Asha Patel. She didn't have coffee, she had a thick manila folder and a look of grim determination. "I pulled the medical records from the Eastern Europe transfer," she said, sliding the folder over the console. "You need to see this before you go back in there." Travis flipped through the pages. The clinical language was more brutal than any video. Repeated exposure to grade 4 electric stimuli. Fractured ribs healed poorly. Chemical burns on the inner thighs, likely from caustic cleaning agents used in the fighting pits. "They didn't just try to train him, Travis," Patel said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "They tried to break his spirit to make him more game. They wanted a dog that fought because it had nothing left to lose. Rook survived because of the foundation you laid, the tactical intelligence, but he's using those skills now to keep the world at bay. He's not a weapon. He's a survivor with a broken heart." Travis closed the folder. The guilt he had been carrying since Manila shifted, becoming sharper, more focused. He hadn't just made a monster. He had made a masterpiece and then left it in the hands of vandals. "I laid the foundation," Travis said. "I taught him that the only person he could trust was the man at the other end of the lead. And then I disappeared." Suddenly, a red light began to pulse on the command console. A low-frequency alarm vibrated through the floor. "What is that?" Travis asked, his tactical instincts instantly overriding his fatigue. "Security perimeter breach," Patel said, her face turning pale as she tapped at a secondary monitor. Long-range sensors picked up 2 vehicles moving through the canyon. "Not ours." Kane's voice crackled over the facility-wide intercom. "All personnel to level 2 alert. We have an unauthorized approach. Security teams to the perimeter. This is not a drill." Travis looked at the satellite feed. 2 black SUVs were weaving through the red rock formations, moving with a disciplined, tactical spacing. "Who are they?" Patel whispered. "The Damascus program had a lot of enemies," Travis said, his eyes fixed on the screen. "We did raids that took out high-value targets across the Levant. There's an insurgent cell, the Al-Qadar remnants, that's been hunting down the program's handlers and dogs for years. Revenge operations. They don't want the tech, they want the bodies. They're coming here? For Rook. For all of us," Travis said. He looked at the timer on the wall. 42 hours remaining. I need to get back to the yard. If they breach the perimeter, the first thing Kane will do is execute the assets, so they don't fall into enemy hands. I have to finish this now. The heat of the second day was a physical wall, but Travis didn't hesitate. He entered Section 4 with a different energy today. He was no longer the ghost of a disgraced handler. He was a man running out of time. He didn't strip his shirt this time. He wore a plain gray t-shirt, his arms exposed to show the lack of hidden weapons. He walked to the center of the yard and, without a word, he performed a move that would have been considered heresy in any traditional K-9 school. He lay down. He sprawled flat on his back in the red dirt, his arms spread wide, his throat exposed to the sky. In the language of the pack, it was the ultimate submissive display. It was a statement of total, absolute vulnerability. I cannot hurt you. I will not fight you. I am at your mercy. From the observation deck, he heard a muffled shout of protest, likely Reeves, but he ignored it. He closed his eyes and listened to the desert. He heard the wind. He heard the distant, muffled sound of a security gate being slammed shut. And then he heard the pause. Rook didn't charge. The dog's approach was slow, methodical, and heavy with suspicion. Travis could feel the vibration of the earth as the Malinois circled him. The shadow of the dog fell over Travis's face, blocking the sun. He could smell Rook, the scent of dry fur, dust, and the metallic tang of old scars. The dog's breath was a warm, rhythmic puff against Travis's neck. A single growl, low and vibrating, rumbled in Rook's chest, a sound like tectonic plates shifting. Travis didn't move. He didn't even hold his breath. He allowed his body to go limp, surrendering to the red earth. I'm sorry, Travis whispered. I'm sorry I left you in the dark. The growling stopped. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Travis had ever heard. He opened his eyes. Rook was standing directly over him, his massive head lowered, his amber eyes inches from Travis's own. For the first time, Travis didn't see the tactical coldness. He saw the pain. He saw a dog that was exhausted from carrying the weight of a war that should have ended years ago. Rook lowered his head further. Very slowly, with a tentative, shivering motion, the dog rested his chin on Travis's open palm. It was a light touch, hardly more than the weight of a leaf, but to Travis, it felt like an electric shock. It was the first time in 3 years that Rook had touched a human being without the intent to destroy. It was a bridge built across an abyss of trauma. Travis's fingers curled instinctively, just a fraction, grazing the soft fur beneath Rook's jaw. The dog didn't pull away. He let out a long, shuddering breath and closed his eyes. Up in the observation tower, Dr. Patel leaned her forehead against the glass, her breath hitching. Even Kane stood frozen, the asset valuation momentarily forgotten in the face of something he couldn't quantify. But in the shadows of the command center, Reeves wasn't watching the yard. He was tucked into a dark corner, his back to the cameras, a burner phone pressed to his ear. He's doing it, Reeves whispered into the phone, his voice cold and treacherous. The bond is forming. If you're going to hit the facility, you do it tonight. Before he turns that dog into something even you can't kill. He ended the call and slipped the phone into his tactical vest, a dark smile playing on his lips as he watched Travis and Rook through the monitor. The war wasn't over. It was just getting started. The desert sun dipped below the horizon, bleeding a deep, bruised purple across the Arizona sky. As the temperature plummeted, the heat shimmer of the yard was replaced by a chilling, crystalline clarity. In the center of Section 4, the impossible had become a quiet reality. Travis Halstead sat with his back against one of the reinforced steel posts, his legs stretched out in the dirt. Beside him, not pacing, not lunging, but sitting with the heavy, slumped posture of a weary soldier, was Rook. The dog's shoulder was pressed against Travis's thigh. It was a contact that would have resulted in a severed femoral artery 48 hours ago. Now it was an anchor. The electronic lock on the outer gate buzzed. Travis didn't move his hand from where it rested, fingers buried deep in the thick ruff of Rook's neck. He felt the dog's muscles tingle, a low vibration of instinct, but Rook stayed. Dr. Asha Patel stepped through the first perimeter, carrying a small cooler and a thermal blanket. She stopped 10 feet away, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. I've spent 10 years working with high-trauma K9s, she whispered, keeping her voice low and steady. I have never seen a breakthrough like this. Not with a Damascus dog. It's not a breakthrough, Asha, Travis said, his voice raspy from the day's dust. It's a recognition. He's tired of being the only one left on the battlefield. Patel set the cooler down and sat on her heels, watching them. Kane is losing his mind up in the command center. He's replaying the footage of you lying in the dirt over and over. He doesn't know whether to give you a medal or fire you for violating every safety protocol in the Blackridge handbook. Travis looked down at Rook. The dog's amber eyes were half closed, his ears flickering toward the sound of Patel's voice. He was never meant to be handled with protocols. He was meant to be handled with a pulse. Reeves is the one you need to worry about, Patel warned, her expression darkening. He's been in and out of Kane's office all afternoon. He's been making calls. Private ones. He's territorial, Travis. You're making him look like an amateur in front of the board, and a man like Reeves doesn't handle humiliation well. Let him talk, Travis said, his fingers gently tracing the silver scar on Rook's shoulder. I'm not here for the board. I know you're not. But you told me once that you thought you were making them better soldiers. That you were optimizing them. She looked at the massive Malinois whose tail gave a single tentative thump against the red earth. Do you still believe that? Travis was silent for a long moment. The guilt he had been carrying since the Damascus mission felt like a physical weight, heavier than the desert air. No. I was a fool, Asha. I thought I could take the soul of a living creature and sharpen it into a blade without the blade eventually turning on the hand that held it. I didn't make better soldiers. I just made them broken. I took their capacity for trust and traded it for tactical efficiency. It's a debt I'll never be able to fully repay. Rook seemed to sense the shift in Travis's tone. The dog shifted, turning his head to rest it heavily on Travis's knee. It was a gesture of profound, heartbreaking vulnerability. You're repaying it right now, Patel said softly. The peace lasted exactly 20 minutes. Halstead. Dr. Patel. Report to the briefing room immediately. This is a direct order. Kane's voice over the PA system was no longer uncertain. It was cold, corporate, and final. Travis stood up, his joints popping. Rook stood with him, his ears snapping forward, instantly back in guardian mode. Travis gave a low two-tone whistle, a command for stay/secure, and watched as the dog retreated to his sheltered kennel area, his eyes never leaving Travis. Inside the briefing room, the atmosphere was toxic. Kane was standing at the head of the table, his arms crossed. Reeves stood beside him, looking smug, a thick stack of papers in his hand. Sit down, Halstead, Kane said. I'll stand, Travis replied. Suit yourself. Kane gestured to Reeves. Lead handler Reeves has brought some troubling information to my attention. He spent the last 6 hours conducting an independent psychological and professional evaluation of your performance over the last 2 days. Reeves stepped forward, tossing the papers onto the table. I've consulted with 3 outside psychological consultants specializing in high-risk canine trauma. Their assessment of your constructive surrender technique is unanimous, Travis. It's not training. It's a manifestation of your own documented PTSD. You're projecting your trauma onto a dangerous asset. Projecting? Travis asked, a dangerous edge to his voice. You're anthropomorphizing a weapon, Reeves sneered. By lying in the dirt and exposing yourself, you've confused the animal, yes. But you haven't secured it. You've created an unstable bond based on emotional codependency. The report states that you are professionally compromised and emotionally unstable. You're a liability to this facility and frankly you're a danger to the dog. This is a hit job, Kane, Patel snapped, stepping forward. Reeves isn't a psychologist. These consultants are contractors on his personal payroll. It doesn't matter, Kane said, his voice flat. The Blackridge board has seen the report. They've also seen the satellite footage of the unauthorized vehicles in the canyon. We are under a level 2 security threat, and I cannot have an unstable civilian contractor playing games in my yards. The board has voted. Your contract is terminated effective immediately. And Rook? Travis asked, his heart hammering against his ribs. Rook is to be terminated at 0800 hours tomorrow, Kane said. He's a failed asset from a failed program. We're cutting our losses. You have until dawn to vacate the property, Reeves added, a cruel glint in his eye. Security will escort you to your jeep. Don't make this difficult, Halstead. You've already lost. Travis felt the world tilting. The 3 years of exile, the flights across the world, the hours in the desert heat, it was all collapsing into this one moment of corporate betrayal. He looked at the exit, then at the monitors where Rook was pacing the yard, sensing the tension in the air. No, Travis said. Excuse me? Kane blinked. I'm not leaving him. Security, Kane shouted. 2 armed guards stepped into the room, their hands on their holsters. But before they could move, the red light on the secure phone on the table began to flash. Not a pulse, but a steady, high-priority strobe. Kane scowled and picked it up. This is Kane. Yes. But Colonel, the board has already... I understand, but the liability... Kane's face went from tan to a sickly pale gray. He looked at Travis, then back at the phone. Yes, sir. Understood. Don. Not a minute later. He hung up the phone with a trembling hand. Colonel Stern. Travis asked. He's been monitoring the yard feeds from D.C., Kane said, his voice tight with fury. He's invoked the National Security Oversight Clause in our contract. He's overriding the board's decision for exactly 12 hours. He says if you haven't certified that dog by sunrise, he'll personally sign the death warrant. But until then, you're the only one allowed in Section 4. Reeves's face twisted in rage. This is a mistake. That dog is a ticking bomb. Then stay out of the blast radius, Travis said, leaning over the table until he was inches from Reeves's face. Because if I find out you had anything to do with those SUVs in the canyon, you won't need a psychological report to know what I'm capable of. Travis spent the night in the yard. He didn't go to the barracks. He didn't eat. He brought a single wool blanket and sat in the dirt next to Rook's kennel. The stars above the canyon were cold and bright, a million eyes watching the final vigil of two ghosts. Rook didn't sleep either. The dog lay with his head on Travis's lap, his breathing steady but his body coiled. Every few minutes, Rook's ears would twitch toward the perimeter fence, his nose testing the wind. We're both weapons, buddy, Travis whispered, stroking the dog's scarred flank. Someone took us apart and put us back together with pieces that didn't fit. They taught us how to survive the dark, but they never taught us how to live in the light. Rook let out a low, soft whine, the first sound Travis had heard from him that wasn't a growl or a snarl. Reeves is wrong, Travis said. This isn't projection. It's justice. You saved my life in Damascus, even if you don't remember it. You alerted on that mortar before the first shell even left the tube. I'm not leaving you again. The night grew deeper. The facility around them was silent, but it was a tense, artificial silence. Travis watched the shadows on the ridge. He knew the Alcadar cell was out there, waiting for the moon to drop. And he knew Reeves was somewhere inside, waiting for his own version of the sunrise. Whatever happens when the sun comes up, Travis whispered into Rook's ear, you're not a weapon anymore. You're a guardian. As the first faint line of gray began to touch the eastern horizon, the silence of the desert was shattered. It wasn't the sound of an alarm. It was the sharp, rhythmic pop-pop-pop of suppressed small arms fire coming from the main gate. Rook's head snapped up. His lips pulled back, not in a rabid snarl, but in a silent, tactical baring of teeth. He stood over Travis, his body a solid wall of mahogany muscle. Guardian protocol, Travis said, his voice turning to ice as he stood up. They're here. The war had finally come to the desert. The pre-dawn air was a cold, brittle glass that shattered at exactly 4:47 a.m. It wasn't the siren that woke the facility, it was a rhythmic, muffled thud-thud-thud, the sound of 40mm grenades hitting the perimeter sensor towers. A second later, the sky over the northern ridge erupted in a bloom of artificial orange. The shockwave rattled the chain link of Section 4, sending a vibration through the red dirt that Travis felt in his teeth. Rook was on his feet before the first grenade had even finished its arc. He didn't bark. He didn't spin. He stood in a low, predatory crouch, his head level with his shoulders, his ears scanning the frequency of the chaos. All hands, we have a level 1 breach at North Gate. Repeat, level 1 breach. Kane's voice over the PA was tight, bordering on a screech. Security teams to the motor pool. Protocol Scorch is in effect. I repeat, Protocol Scorch. Travis felt a cold spike of ice in his chest. He knew the Blackridge handbook. Protocol Scorch meant the destruction of sensitive assets that could be captured. In a military contractor facility, that didn't mean shredding documents. It meant the Damascus dogs. They're coming to kill you, buddy, Travis whispered, his eyes locked on the interior gate. Less than 30 seconds later, the beam of a high-powered tactical light swept across the yard. 2 security guards in full riot gear rounded the corner, carrying suppressed carbines. They weren't looking for insurgents. They were heading for the kennel controls. Halstead. Step away from the animal, one of the guards shouted, his voice muffled by a gas mask. Director's orders. Scorch protocol. We're clearing the yard. Travis stepped in front of Rook, his arms spread wide. He's not an asset. He's a soldier. You don't execute soldiers because the gate's down. Move, Halstead, or you're a casualty of the breach. The guard raised his carbine, the red laser dot dancing across Travis's chest. Rook let out a sound then, a low vibrating growl that seemed to come from the earth itself. The dog's muscles were coiled like spring steel, ready to launch through the wire. Travis didn't look back at the guards. He looked at the electronic keypad on the gate. He knew the override code. He'd memorized it the night before while watching the shift changes. 7-9-2-4. The lock hissed open. Travis threw the gate wide. "Rook, Guardian. With me." It was a command Rook hadn't heard in 3 years. It wasn't the assault command. It wasn't the neutralize command. Guardian was the rarest of the Damascus protocols, the one designed for VIP protection, for standing between a survivor and the dark. The guards froze. They expected the dog to bolt for the desert or turn on Travis. Instead, Rook surged forward and stopped exactly 6 inches in front of Travis's left knee. He sat, his eyes fixed on the guards, his body a living shield. "If you want to shoot him, you go through me," Travis said, his voice a calm, deadly rasp. "But if you want to survive what's coming through that north gate, you'll give me a radio and get to the command center." The guards hesitated. A massive explosion rocked the main administration building, followed by the chatter of heavy machine gun fire. The insurgents were inside the perimeter. "Go!" Travis roared. The guards turned and ran toward the interior defense line. Travis didn't waste a second. He ducked into the Section 4 equipment locker and grabbed a discarded tactical vest. No plates, no weapon, just a radio and a heavy-duty flashlight. "Okay, Rook," Travis said, kneeling for a split second to lock eyes with the Malinois. "This is the one we trained for. Not the raids. Not the kills. The protection. You stay on my flank. You target the weapons, not the men. Do you understand?" Rook let out a sharp, singular bark. The amber eyes were no longer cold. They were focused with a terrifying, singular purpose. The facility was a labyrinth of smoke and strobe lights. The Al-Qadar cell had moved with surgical precision, targeting the K9 compounds first. They wanted the Damascus dogs dead, a final act of vengeance for the raids in Syria. Travis and Rook moved through the service tunnels, a pair of ghosts in the flickering red emergency lights. Rook was a shadow at Travis's side, moving with a silent, haunting grace. Every time they reached a junction, Rook would pause, his nose testing the air for the scent of cordite and strange adrenaline. "Asha," Travis hissed into the radio. "Patel, come in." "Travis." Her voice was frantic, drowned out by the sound of glass shattering. "I'm in the medical bay. They've breached the west wing. Reeves is—" "Oh God." Travis. Reeves opened the kennel locks. "He's trying to let the dogs out to distract them while he gets to the helipad. He's letting the Damascus dogs into a crossfire," Travis growled. "I'm coming to you. Stay low." They hit the west wing corridor just as 3 insurgents in desert camo rounded the corner. These weren't amateurs, they were hardened mercenaries. They raised their AK-74s, the muzzle flashes illuminating the hallway in jagged bursts. "Rook, Guardian, hold." Travis dove behind a heavy gurney. Rook didn't launch into a blind rage. He moved in a zigzag pattern, staying low to the ground, a target too fast to track. He closed the 30-foot gap in 3 seconds. The first insurgent didn't even have time to scream. Rook didn't go for the throat. He hit the man's lead arm with the force of a sledgehammer, his jaws locking onto the rifle's fur end and the man's hand. He wrenched the weapon down, using his 95 pounds to upend the man's balance. As the second insurgent tried to aim, Rook released and pivoted, the Damascus pivot, striking the man's thigh and dragging him to the floor. Travis surged forward, using the distraction to disarm the third man with a brutal military-grade shoulder throw. Within seconds, the 3 men were on the ground, disarmed and incapacitated. "Secure," Travis shouted. Rook stood over the downed men, his teeth bared, but he didn't bite. He was waiting. He was holding the perimeter. "Good boy," Travis rasped, his heart hammering. "Moving." They reached the medical bay just as the door was being kicked in. Inside, Dr. Patel was shielding a sedated shepherd on the operating table. Standing by the back exit was Reeves, his face twisted in a mask of pure, cowardly panic. He held a sidearm, his hand shaking. "Get away from me." Reeves screamed as Travis and Rook burst in. "Drop the gun, Reeves," Travis shouted. "The insurgents are in the hall. It's your fault." Reeves wailed. "You brought them here. You and that monster." Reeves pointed the gun at Rook. "Don't." Travis stepped forward, but at that moment the ceiling tiles above the medical bay collapsed. A fourth insurgent, a tall man with a jagged scar across his brow, dropped from the ventilation duct. He had a suppressed submachine gun and his eyes were fixed on the dog. He didn't care about Travis. He didn't care about Reeves. He was here for the ghost of Damascus. The insurgent leveled the weapon at Rook's chest. No. Travis didn't think. He didn't calculate. The man who had spent 3 years trying to forget his sins suddenly realized that his redemption was standing on 4 legs. Travis lunged, throwing his body across the space between the barrel and the dog. Thwip thwip thwip. The suppressed rounds didn't sound like much. They felt like 3 successive punches from a heavyweight boxer. 1 in the shoulder. 2 in the side. Travis hit the floor, the world turning into a blurred kaleidoscope of white light and red pain. Rook? He gasped, the air bubbling in his lungs. Guardian, neutralize. Rook didn't bark. He let out a roar, a sound of ancient, primal fury. He didn't use the protect protocol anymore. He launched. He hit the insurgent in midair, the impact sending both of them through the glass partition of the recovery room. The hallway outside erupted as the Blackridge security teams finally arrived, pinned down in a final, desperate firefight. Travis lay on the cold linoleum, his vision tunneling. He felt a wet, warm pressure against his side. He managed to turn his head. Rook was there. The dog was limping, a dark stain of blood blooming on his front shoulder where a stray round had grazed him, but he hadn't left Travis's side. The dog pressed his head against Travis's chest, his tail giving a single weak thump against the floor. You stayed. Travis whispered, his hand shaking as he reached out to touch Rook's blood-matted fur. You're a good soldier. Dr. Patel was suddenly there, her hands pressing hard against Travis's wounds. Stay with me, Travis. Rook, stay. Keep him awake. The dog let out a low, mournful whine, his amber eyes wide with a terrifying human-like grief. He began to lick Travis's face, his rough tongue a frantic attempt to keep his handler from drifting into the dark. The last thing Travis saw before the world went black was Rook standing over him, his head high, his ears forward, guarding the man who had finally, at the cost of his own blood, taught a weapon how to love. The first thing Travis felt was the cold. It was a sterile, refrigerated chill that smelled of rubbing alcohol, latex, and the metallic tang of dried blood. Then came the sound, the rhythmic, mechanical hiss-thump of a ventilator and the steady, artificial chirp of a heart monitor. He tried to open his eyes, but his eyelids felt like they had been soldered shut. His body was a map of white-hot agony, centered in his shoulder and radiating out from a jagged hollow in his side. He tried to draw a breath, and a sharp, stabbing pressure reminded him of the 3 suppressed rounds he'd taken in the medical bay. Travis? Can you hear me? The voice was soft, melodic, and weary. Dr. Asha Patel. Travis managed a jagged moan, his fingers twitching against the stiff hospital sheets. Slowly, the world began to bleed into focus. A stark white ceiling, the blur of an IV drip, and the silhouette of a woman sitting by his bed. Don't try to move, she said, her hand resting gently on his forearm. You've been out for 36 hours. 1 round shattered your clavicle, the other 2 played hell with your intercostals. You're lucky the Alcadar Mercs were using subsonic rounds. If they'd been full velocity, I'd be signing your death certificate instead of your chart. Travis's throat felt like it was filled with broken glass. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the room, searching for the only thing that mattered. Rook? He rasped. Where is he? Asha didn't answer immediately. She leaned back, her face unreadable in the dim light of the recovery room. The dog Asha, Travis said, his voice rising in a panicked wheeze that sent a flare of pain through his ribs. Is he? A heavy, rhythmic thud-thud-thud sounded from the corner of the room, hidden in the shadows of a privacy screen. A massive, mahogany-furred head rose into the light. Rook was standing there, his front left shoulder wrapped in a thick pressure bandage, his amber eyes wide and alert. He let out a soft, vibrating huff and took a limping step toward the bed, resting his muzzle on Travis's hand. Travis let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 3 years. His fingers curled into the dog's ruff. You're still here. He wouldn't let the orderlies near you, Asha said, a faint smile touching her lips. After the security teams cleared the hallway, he stood over you for 20 minutes. He didn't growl, he didn't attack, he just guarded. I had to personally guarantee he wouldn't be tranquilized just to get him into the medical wing. He's been in this room ever since. He hasn't slept, Travis. He just watches the door. The door in question hissed open. Travis expected Kane, or perhaps a contingent of security guards to finish the Scorch protocol. Instead, a man in a charcoal suit and a military-grade buzz cut stepped into the room. Colonel Marcus Stern. His face was a mask of granite, but his eyes held a weight of regret that Travis hadn't seen in the briefing rooms of D.C. "Colonel," Travis grunted, trying to sit up. "Stay down, Halstead." "That's an order," Stern said, pulling up a chair. He looked at Rook, and for a moment the hardened officer seemed to soften. "I saw the helmet cam footage from the guards in Section 4. I saw the way he held the perimeter. I've never seen anything like it." "He's a guardian, Marcus," Travis said. "I told you." "You did. And I should have listened to you 3 years ago." Stern leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial whisper. "The board is in damage control. Kane is being demoted and Reeves is currently in federal custody. We found the burner phone. He was the one who leaked the facility's coordinates to the Al-Qadar cell. He wanted the Damascus dogs dead so your methods would be discredited. He thought if Rook killed a few insurgents before being put down, he could claim the dog was an uncontrollable monster and save his own reputation." Travis closed his eyes, a wave of cold fury washing over him. "Reeves sold out his own people for a promotion." "He did. But that's not why I'm here, Travis." Stern pulled a tablet from his briefcase and swiped it open. "There's something you need to know about the Damascus shutdown. Something I couldn't tell you while the program was active." Stern flipped the screen toward Travis. It wasn't a tactical report. It was a series of internal memos from the Pentagon's Ethics Oversight Committee. "You were the scapegoat, Travis," Stern said. "The mission in Syria that went rogue? It wasn't your dogs. It was a secondary unit trained by a rival contractor using your blueprints but none of your ethics. They were using high-voltage prods, sensory deprivation, and chemical stimulants to amp the dogs for urban pacification. When those dogs attacked civilians, the brass panicked. They couldn't admit they had authorized a torture-based training program, so they burned the entire Damascus name. They burned you, and they scattered your dogs to private contractors who didn't know the difference between a soldier and a slave." Travis stared at the screen, his vision blurring. I thought I was the one who broke them." "You were the only one trying to save them," Stern said. "Rook didn't attack those handlers because he was rabid. He attacked them because he recognized the Damascus brand on their uniforms and expected the torture to start again. When you walked into that yard without a suit, you were the first person in 4 years who didn't look like a threat. He didn't just recognize your scent, Travis. He recognized your soul." The silence in the room was absolute, save for the hum of the heart monitor. Rook shifted his weight, pressing his warm, solid side against Travis's bed. "The program wasn't shut down, Travis," Stern continued. "It was relocated, expanded. There are dozens of dogs like Rook out there, ghosts of a program that tried to turn them into machines. The Pentagon wants to clean the slate. They've offered me the budget to start a new division." Stern stood up, pacing the small room. "I have 2 options for you, Halstead. Option 1. You and Rook are reinstated. Full back pay, honorable discharge amended to active duty status. You become the lead trainer for a new special K9 unit. We go after the contractors who abused the tech. We bring the Damascus dogs home." Travis looked at his bandaged hand resting on Rook's head. The life of a soldier. The raids. The darkness. The singular bond used for destruction. "And option 2? Travis asked. "Retirement," Stern said. "But not the kind you were doing in Manila. I've secured a grant for a civilian-run rehabilitation program. A place where dogs like Rook, and the veterans who handled them, can learn to be something other than weapons. You'd be the director. You'd have the land, the medical staff, and the authority to take uncontrollable assets off the military's hands before they're terminated." Stern stopped at the foot of the bed. "The world doesn't need more killers, Travis. It needs people who know how to fix what the war broke. You spent 3 years running from the monster you thought you made. Now you have a chance to prove the monster never existed." Travis looked at Rook. The dog was watching him, his head cocked to the side, his ears flickering as if he understood the gravity of the choice. For the first time since Damascus, Travis didn't feel the shadow of the past looming over him. He felt a quiet, steady light. "We're done being weapons, Marcus," Travis said, his voice stronger than it had been since he woke up. "I want the rehab program. I want to teach them how to come home." Stern nodded, a ghost of a smile appearing on his face. "I thought you might say that. I'll have the papers drawn up. We're calling it Project Guardian." As Stern left the room, Dr. Patel stepped forward, checking Travis's 4. She looked at him with a new kind of respect. "It's going to be hard work, Travis. You're going to be dealing with a lot of broken hearts, canine and human." "I know," Travis said, pulling Rook's head closer until their foreheads touched. but I think I know a guy who can help me teach them the most important lesson. What's that? Asha asked. Travis smiled, his eyes fixed on the amber gaze of his partner. That the strongest thing a warrior can ever do is choose to trust again. In the quiet of the hospital room, Rook let out a soft, contented sigh and closed his eyes finally, for the first time in years, falling into a deep, dreamless sleep. The Arizona sun still rose over the Red Rock canyons with the same pitiless heat, but the air inside the perimeter of what was once the Blackridge Tactical Facility felt different. 6 months had passed since the smoke of the Alcadar attack had cleared, and the physical scars on the buildings had been patched with fresh stucco and hope. Gone were the high-voltage warning signs and the guards with suppressed carbines. In their place stood a modest, sand-colored sign at the gate, its letters carved deep into a slab of local cedar, Project Guardian. Travis Halstead stood on the wide porch of the new administration building, a mug of black coffee in his hand. He was leaner now, his face bronzed by the desert sun, the lines around his eyes etched not by exhaustion, but by a quiet, focused purpose. His shoulder still twinged when the weather shifted, and a jagged silver scar remained on his side, a permanent receipt for the price of redemption. Beside him, Rook sat with the stillness of a monument. The Belgian Malinois' coat had regained its rich, mahogany luster, and the bandage on his shoulder was a thing of the past. He didn't scan the ridgelines for mortars anymore. Instead, his ears were swiveled toward the training yards, tracking the rhythmic thump-thump of tails and the low, encouraging murmurs of human voices. Ready for the morning session? Travis turned to see Dr. Asha Patel stepping onto the porch. She looked younger without the weight of the Blackridge corporate mandate hanging over her. She was now the facility's lead veterinarian and Travis's partner in the truest sense of the word. Born ready, Travis said, nodding toward the dust-covered truck pulling through the gate. Today was graduation day for the first official cohort of Project Guardian. Down in the main yard, 3 handler dog pairs were already going through their morning rituals. There was Sarah Chin, a former K-9 officer whose career had been ended by a traumatic assault, and Axel, a German shepherd deemed too aggressive for the force. There was Marcus Webb, a veteran with PTSD, and Juno, a rescue who had survived 3 failed adoptions. And Jesse Martinez, working with Coda, a Malinois who had been rescued from the same fighting rings Rook had once survived. Travis walked down the steps, Rook at his side, not on a leash but bound by a thread of trust that was stronger than steel. "All right, everyone circle up," Travis called out. The pairs gathered. The dogs were alert but calm, their eyes fixed on their handlers. "What we're doing here isn't about sit, stay, or heal," Travis said, his voice carrying across the yard. "Those are tricks. We're here for the bond. Remember the core of constructive surrender. A warrior's greatest strength isn't his ability to dominate, it's his courage to be vulnerable. If you don't trust the dog to see your weakness, the dog will never trust you to be his strength." He watched as Sarah knelt in the dirt, allowing Axel to lean his heavy head against her shoulder. It was the same gesture Rook had made 6 months ago in the dark of Section 4. "They aren't weapons," Travis continued. "They're mirrors. If you bring anger to the yard, they'll give it back to you. If you bring peace, they'll find it with you. Rook and I are going to show you how we bridge the gap with a new arrival." The truck at the gate came to a halt. 2 handlers from a nearby military installation stepped out, looking weary and on edge. They went to the back of the truck and opened the heavy, reinforced crate. The sound that erupted was a raw, primal scream of fury. A massive German shepherd, his fur a chaotic mix of gray and white, lunged at the bars of the crate, his teeth snapping with a sound like a hammer hitting an anvil. "Careful, Halstead," one of the handlers called out, wiping sweat from his brow. "This is Phantom. He's already put 2 of our guys in the hospital. He's a total loss. Command recommended termination, but Colonel Stern said you'd take him." Travis walked toward the truck, Rook moving with him in a slow, rhythmic trot. As they reached the crate, Travis felt a cold jolt of recognition. He looked at the dog's ears, the specific way they were pinned, and the way Phantom's eyes weren't focused on the men, but were scanning the roofline of the clinic. "Damascus," Travis whispered. "Excuse me?" the handler asked. "He's one of mine," Travis said, his voice thick with a sudden, overwhelming weight. "He's from the 3rd cycle of the Damascus program. I trained him 4 years ago in Syria. His name was Asset 14. Travis looked at the snarling, terrified animal. Phantom was a ghost from the life Travis had tried to bury. He remembered the dog as a pup, bold, intelligent, and fiercely loyal. Seeing him now, reduced to a trembling engine of rage, was a punch to the gut. "Open the crate," Travis ordered. "He'll kill you, sir," the handler warned. I said open it. The handler stepped back, unlatching the door with a long pole and retreating to the safety of the truck. Phantom exploded out of the crate, hit the ground in a rolling tuck, and immediately spun to face the threat, his hackles a jagged ridge of defiance. Travis didn't move. He stood 10 feet away, his hands at his sides. Rook stood beside him, perfectly still, his tail giving a single, calm wag. "Easy, Phantom," Travis said softly. "The war's over, buddy. You're home." Phantom lunged, a 40-pound charge of pure muscle. He stopped inches from Travis, his jaws snapping in the empty air. He was waiting for the blow, the shock, the shout of dominance. It never came. Travis slowly lowered himself into the dirt, exactly as he had done with Rook. He sat cross-legged, his head bowed, his eyes fixed on the red dust. Rook followed suit, lying down 3 feet away, his chin resting on his paws, modeling a state of absolute, peaceful indifference. For 5 minutes, the only sound in the yard was Phantom's ragged breathing and the wind whistling through the canyon. The aggressive shepherd circled them, his nose testing the air. He smelled Travis, the scent of the man who had first taught him to track. He smelled Rook, the scent of a fellow soldier who wasn't afraid. Slowly, the tension began to drain from Phantom's spine. His tail, which had been tucked tight against his belly, unfurled. He stopped snarling. He looked at Rook, then at Travis, his head cocked in a gesture of profound, heartbreaking confusion. Rook let out a soft, low huff. "A canine, it's okay." Phantom took a step forward. Then another. He leaned in, his nose brushing against Travis's knee. Travis felt a single cold drop of moisture on his skin. He didn't reach out. He didn't move. He simply existed in that space with the dog, offering a sanctuary of silence. After what felt like an eternity, Phantom didn't attack. He let out a long, shuddering sigh and lay down in the dirt, his body parallel to Travis and Rook. He wasn't surrendered, he was exhausted. He had finally found a place where he didn't have to fight. Up on the porch, Asha Patel let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The 3 student handlers watched in stunned silence, their own dogs leaning into them as if sensing the gravity of the moment. Travis looked up at the handlers from the truck. "He stays. Tell Colonel Stern the Damascus file on Asset 14 is officially closed." As the sun began to set, painting the canyon in shades of gold and fire, Travis and Rook sat on the ridge overlooking the facility. Below them, the lights of the dormitories flickered on, and the sound of dogs being fed and settled for the night drifted up on the evening breeze. "We did it, buddy," Travis whispered, his hand resting on Rook's head. He thought back to the rum-soaked nights in Manila and the hollow ache of the desert in Morocco. He realized now that he hadn't been running from the dogs he had made. He had been running from the man he thought he had become. But Rook had seen past the uniform, the guilt, and the disgrace. Project Guardian was more than a rehabilitation center. It was a bridge. It was proof that no soldier, human or canine, was ever truly beyond saving. "One soldier at a time," Travis said, his voice firm and clear. "One dog at a time. That's how we win the war we should have been fighting all along." Rook looked up at him, his amber eyes bright with the reflection of the sunset. He gave a soft, contented bark and nudged Travis's hand. They stood up together, 2 veterans of a dark past walking toward a bright, purposeful future. As they headed back down the trail toward the lights of the facility, Travis knew the work would never be finished. There were more ghosts in the desert, more weapons waiting to be unmade. But as long as the red rocks stood and the stars watched over the canyon, Project Guardian would be there, teaching the world that the strongest thing a warrior can ever do is choose to come home. The office was a quiet sanctuary of cedar and glass, a far cry from the humid balconies of Manila or the sterile interrogation rooms of Damascus. On the wall behind Travis's desk hung a framed map of the Southwest, dotted with pins marking the locations of veteran outreach centers and K-9 rescue partners. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing over a mountain of paperwork that would have once driven him to the nearest bottle of rum. Now, the folders represented lives in the balance. Travis leaned back, rubbing his eyes. He'd spent the morning reviewing 47 new applications for rehabilitation. The requests were no longer just coming from private contractors. They were coming from police departments, search and rescue teams, and even the Department of Defense. Beside that stack sat another, 23 requests from veteran handlers across the country asking to be trained in the constructive surrender methodology. The program was expanding. It was no longer just about the ghosts of Damascus. It was about every dog that had been discarded as a broken tool. A soft knock at the door preceded Dr. Asha Patel. She carried 2 mugs of tea, a rare indulgence in the desert heat. She set one on his desk, her eyes drifting to the stacks of paper. "The DoD sent over the revised training protocols this morning," she said, her voice filled with a quiet, hard-won triumph. "They're officially phasing out aggressive conditioning in all Tier 1 K-9 programs. No more shock collars for motivation. No more sensory deprivation. They're calling it the Halstead Standard." Travis let out a dry, tired laugh. "I didn't do it for a name on a manual, Asha. I know you didn't. But look at this." She gestured to a secondary file. "There are 3 active ethics boards investigating the contractors who bought the Damascus surplus. They're tracing the abuse back to the source. You didn't just save Rook, Travis. You've changed the entire industry. You've made it impossible for them to treat these animals like hardware anymore." Travis looked out the window at the yards below, where a young handler was sitting patiently with a terrified lab mix. "It's not enough. Not yet. There are still thousands of them out there." "It's a start," Asha insisted, her hand momentarily resting on his shoulder. "A damn good one." The peace of the afternoon was interrupted by a buzz from the front gate security. "Director Halstead? You have a visitor. He says he's not on the schedule, but he says he knows you." Travis checked the gate camera. His jaw tightened. Standing by the cedar sign was a man he hadn't seen since the night of the attack. Reeves looked different. The tactical gear was gone, replaced by a cheap, ill-fitting suit. He looked smaller, his cocky swagger replaced by the hunched shoulders of a man who had spent 6 months in legal limbo. "Let him in," Travis said. "Escort only. To the main courtyard." Travis met him in the open air. Rook was at Travis's side, his presence a silent, looming reminder of everything Reeves had tried to destroy. Reeves stopped 10 feet away, his eyes darting to the dog, then to the scars on Travis's shoulder visible through his t-shirt. "I heard the conspiracy charges were dropped," Travis said, his voice like cold stone. "Insufficient evidence for a criminal conviction," Reeves muttered, his voice hollow. "But the civil suits took everything. I'm barred from the industry. Banned from working with K9S for life. I'm a pariah, Halstead. You didn't come here for a job, Reeves? So why are you here?" Reeves looked at the ground, then back at Travis. There was no smirk this time. "I was scared. When you showed up, when I saw what you could do with a dog I couldn't even touch. I knew I was a fraud. I'd been using those abusive methods because I didn't have the guts to do what you do. I saw you as a threat to my career, so I made a choice. I thought if the insurgents took the dog out, no one would ever know I was faking it." He took a shaky breath. I wanted to say I'm sorry. Not for the lawyers. For the dog." Travis looked at the man. He felt no anger, only a profound, weary pity. "You made choices, Reeves. Now you live with them. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed the bond. There's no reconciliation for that. Not here." "I know," Reeves said, nodding slowly. He looked at Rook one last time, the monster that wasn't, and then turned and walked toward the gate. Travis watched him go. He didn't offer forgiveness, but he accepted the acknowledgement. The truth was finally out in the light. Later that evening, as the desert began to cool, Travis sat at his desk and opened a handwritten letter that had arrived from Colorado. It was on stationery from a place called Warriors and Friends. "Dear Travis, my name is Franklin Hayes. I run a small outfit up here in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. We specialize in matching traumatized veterans with high-needs rescues, mostly shepherds and malice. A mutual friend, James, told me about what you're doing with Project Guardian. I spent 20 years as a handler. I lost my partner, Max, in Afghanistan. For a long time, I thought the only way to survive was to hide from the world. But I've learned that the only way to truly heal is to help others find their way back from the edge. It sounds like we're fighting the same war, just on different fronts. I'd like to collaborate, share some of our success stories, maybe trade some training notes. We aren't alone in this, Halstead. There's a whole network of us now. Stay the course. Franklin." Travis handed the letter to Asha as she walked in. "He's right," Travis said. "We aren't alone. There are people all over the country fixing what the war broke." As the moon rose, Travis took Rook for their nightly walk. They climbed the ridge overlooking the facility, the lights of the kennels glowing like embers in the valley. Travis sat on a rock and Rook leaned against his knees. "You know, Rook," Travis whispered, "Colonel Stern mentioned that retirement fund again. I could buy that cabin in the Sierras. Just you and me. No more cages. No more new arrivals. Just peace." Rook didn't move. He sat perfectly still, his ears swiveled toward the facility. He looked down at the yards where the new dogs were sleeping, then back at Travis. He gave a soft, insistent wag of his tail and nudged Travis's hand with his nose, then turned his gaze back to the work below. Travis understood. Rook didn't want the cabin. He didn't want the silence. He had found his purpose in the same place Travis had, in the eyes of the ones who were still lost. "Okay, buddy," Travis smiled, his heart feeling lighter than it had in decades. "We'll do it together. As long as you want. We're done being weapons, but we'll always be guardians." The following morning was a mirror of the day Travis first arrived at Blackridge. A military transport truck pulled up to the gate, the engine growling. A young corporal stepped out, his face pale. "Director Halstead? We've got a problem. A Malinois from the recent deployment in the Helmand. Handler was killed in an IED blast. The dog's been in a crate for 48 hours. He's feral, sir. He's already bitten 3 medics. They gave us the order to terminate, but Stern said this was his last shot." Travis walked to the back of the truck. Inside the crate, a dog that looked exactly like a younger version of Rook was throwing itself against the bars, a whirlwind of teeth and terrified, mindless aggression. It was a sight that would have made any other man reach for a tranquilizer. Travis looked at Rook. "What do you think, buddy? One more?" Rook stood at Travis's side, his tail wagging with a calm, steady rhythm. He was ready. Travis reached out and unlatched the crate. The dog exploded out, a mahogany blur of fury, skidding to a halt and snarling at the 2 figures in front of him. Travis didn't flinch. He didn't reach for a leash. He stood perfectly still, Rook beside him, both of them radiating a profound, unshakable peace. "Let's teach him what you taught me," Travis whispered. "That the strongest thing a warrior can do is choose trust over fear. That submission to the bond is greater than domination through force. That weapons can be unmade, and soldiers can finally find their way home." The new dog slowed. He stopped snarling. He looked at the man and the veteran dog, his head cocking in confusion as he realized the attack he expected was never coming. Slowly he took one tentative step forward. Travis's voice drifted over the yard as the camera pulled back, showing the 3 of them under the vast, rising Arizona sun. One soldier at a time. One dog at a time. That's how we win the war we should have been fighting all along. Rook took a bullet for a world that called him a monster. The least we can do is make sure his story lives on. Every subscription is a promise that we won't let these dogs be liquidated in the dark. Every like is a signal that redemption matters. If you've ever felt like a cast-off, or if you've ever been the one to offer a second chance, comment home below. We're building a sanctuary here, but we can't do it alone. Don't walk away from the cage. Join the mission.